Okay, hi everyone. I'm just recording these videos to walk through some development, and specifically, I just wanted to walk through the development of the work item stuff. Mainly, I think when I was talking to people and when I was kind of go over the progress itself. I did notice, some things that I, could explain better. Some assumptions I made that kind of didn't really work. As well, and I think the most obvious one is some of the way I divided up the work was not ideal. So this video I will do the listing, and it's an interesting ticket or interesting issue to start first because it's before create, but we'll show that it's still technically possible. So step one to do this would be to create a branch. I'll check it out locally. I'll just copy and paste this thing. Let's remind ourselves. So we want to get a way to list work items. So we want to add a new command, and then that command lists work items, and that's it. So I can peek through the code here, and I can see that this command line parser, and for right now, it can give you a noun and a verb. So in this case, this would be the noun and this would be the verb. We do actually have a wiki document about, so we go to developments, we go to CLI standards. There is a thing here that kind of talks about what the general approach is. So it is using a noun verb pattern, and that's common across a lot of CLIs. So like the GitHub CLI uses the same thing. Terraform, Azure. I use a thing called LXD or Incus, which also does it. But I can showcase. So in the GitHub CLI, which is a little small, I'll just do this. So in the GitHub CLI, which you can run with just GH, if I did GH issue and then list, you can see it's the noun verb pattern. So noun, verb, and then here's all the issues in this project. So my idea here was to use credits as a kind of template. So you can see the credits, it's a class. It inherits from something called iCommand, and then we have some constructors, and then it does stuff. The main function we are interested in is in the one called execute, which receives then a verb and then does the stuff that we want it to. So when I want to implement this list, I want to do something similar. So let's see how we can do that. So I'm going to make a new module or a new file. I'm going to call it work item. I don't know why it's, maybe it's so for step one in any coding thing is to remember how to code. And what I'll do is I'll just do class work item, and it's going to inherit iCommand. And you can see the red squigglies. So the red squiggly means that this is a problem, and you can see that it's because it doesn't implement stuff. So this red squiggly is helpful. I know sometimes we have this aversion. If I was to make a change, I maybe would change, if I was a C# designer or something, I would make it, instead of a red squiggly, to maybe like a purple or something less threatening, because it's really there to help you. The first thing I'll do is I will declare a private member, and I'll call it lms-db context. The reason why I do this, the reason why I do this is because I know I'll need the database at some point, because we're wanting to list things that exist. So yeah, that's a thing. And because of that, I will have a make a constructor. Now this constructor, I'm only going to make one constructor that receives the database. And that's because this work item thing needs a database to work. Credits technically does not need a database because all of the credits are just defined in the class itself. But the database we do. So that's something to be mindful of. And this pattern here of having a constructor that receives kind of like another thing to help it out. So in this case, we have a constructor and it receives a database context. So basically something that can do the database for us. This pattern is called dependency injection, and it's a very common and pretty powerful thing that we use in for a variety of reasons. So we do need a thing for getting help. And I'll just return. So this funny thing with the $3 quotes, we call that. So this is kind of like a combination of two types of strings we have. The $sign refers to an interpolated string. What that means is that we have a string that we can kind of stick variables in line. So if I did something like 1, right, you can see that 1 is like has a different formatting, or you can even do db, right? So that's this database thing. So you can just stick the variable inside the string with these curly brackets, and then everything's good. The other thing about the string is that it has the 3 quotes, and that just refers to a multi-line string. So you can see on our right side we have a string that goes for several lines, and that's that 3 strings help with that. So for description, tracks work items for the program. A work item is something like an assignment or quiz. It's something with a due date, really, is kind of how I would define it. Verbs. In this case, we're just going to put list because that's all we have. And then, yeah, and this should be good. And we can see that we need to implement that. So I can do a switch verb, oops, and then case verb dot list, and I can return list the work items recorded previously. Oh, you know what? This guy needs to be verb. Okay. And defaults, I'm going to just throw. I don't know why it made it a private object, so I want to make this a public string. Great. So we got our 2 functions down. I can actually go up here and just implement all the members, but I'm just going to do this by hand. So we have a last function called execute. So is it a string that we want? Command. So another good tip to have, if you go to something like a class, this is an interface, but if you can go to a class or interface or some sort of objects and then hit F12, it'll take you to the page where it's defined. Oh, and then here, this execute is just a void, which I don't like actually, but I'm going to keep it the same again. I guess one thing about programming is that it's kind of like noticing mistakes and fixing them later in a controlled way. Imagine we were writing a book together, right? Like just because you notice a typo or something doesn't mean you drop everything and fix that typo. you want to kind of record and be like, hey, this chapter is terrible, and then you work through that chapter in an organized way. Part of it is it helps you with part of it is it helps you with kind of keeping on track. So we want to have this verb. We want to have a verb because that's what we're executing with. And similarly, we want to switch the verb on the verb, and this is kind of where our function needs to be. Arguments, exception, invalid verb. So we have a kind of rough skeleton. Now, the actual listing part is going to happen here. However, this function is a void. So it's a void execute, which means that it's not returning anything. And the reason why, when I earlier looked at this and I was like, this doesn't seem good, is because a void is very hard to test, right? Like, how do you test something that doesn't return you anything? So instead of defining my listing stuff in line here, I'm going to define it as a separate function because I want it to be able to test it later. It's not a huge deal if you accidentally implement it in here, but when you go to create that pull request, I'm going to be like, hey, can you take this stuff, stick it into a new function, and then put some tests around it? The general rule of thumb is to try to basically keep your functions as small as possible. So we want to have a function that we can test that does the listing of the work items. So what do we want to call this, or what do we want it to return? Well, to make it easy, I'm going to return work items as an array. I think that's how we do it. And I'll say call this function get work items. It's going to give you red squigglies because it doesn't return anything. So how do we get the work items? Well, we go to I'll just call it var work items equals db dash get. I forget how to use the db context. Maybe it's find an entity. That's singular. Why would I just like a list? I thought that would be a function that's called list. Add async. Oh, maybe it's just items. Oh, there we go. That's what I want. But it's not happy. Oh, that's not what I... So a lot of this is just figuring out how to best get this, and a lot of it's just like reading documents. Another approach I could do is go and go here and then look through the documentation. And the nice thing about C# is that it's very good documentation. But here I think we found what we want. We want an enumerable. Isn't there just one called get enumerator? Let's get async enumerator, which is similar. And there isn't one that is called toList. There we go. So if I could put my mouse over here, it's a list of work items. Now it gives me that little question mark. creates a list out of, for some reason this could be a null, but we'll see. If I return, actually I could just return this. Let's see if that works. It might give me some yellow. Oh, can I do to array? Oh, there we go. So this is an array, and then this is a list. So in programming, and C#, we have lists and then we have arrays, and they're very similar. They're just like a sequence of items, but there are differences. My hunch is that an array is a fixed length of stuff, and then a list is not. And if I go to here and I go to here, it says that it copies the elements from the list into a new array, which doesn't seem like what I want. I just want to fetch everything, right? And I don't really care how it looks like when you do fetch. Let's see if it can give me to an enumerable as enumerable. I don't. If I did an enumerable, then work item, that could be. Oh, I think I misspelled it. Cool. So I changed this function so that instead of returning an array, it's returning an enumerable. And the reason why I did that is because as we saw when we tried to create the array, it's copying into a new list. And for efficiency reasons, it's better to do it as an enumerable. So what it means as an enumerable is I can call this and it's gonna get ready to create basically our list of items, but it's not going to actually do it. It's kind of like does it on demand. So from an efficiency point of view, it's very good because it's not gonna like prefetch things and then copy to a new array. Just to be very sure, I might go to just do some Googling, so I might be like list versus enumerable and see what people say. Enumerable describes a behavior, whereas this is an implementation. So yeah, so when you use an enumerable, you give the compiler a chance to defer work until later. So when this guy's talking about link, so basically he's talking about database related stuff. And here, basically what he's saying is that an enumerable is great when you do something like a SQL type stuff. So we're using the link expressions, because what this means is that the program sees all of this stuff first, and it's not like it gets an entire list, like gets all the items and then tries to filter it. It looks at the query first and then says, hey, I gotta eventually create a query for that. So it gives it a chance to optimize it. So generally, enumerable is fine. So it's faster to use a list over enumerable, only if you want to prevent a query from being executed more than once. So my understanding here is that if I try to get all the items in here once, and then I go later and be like, okay, puts all the items here again in another part of the code, that's going to do 2 database calls. In this case, I don't care that much. So I'm going to just do it like this because it's kind of the cleanest way I think of, and I'll spit it out in here. So, and here it's not giving me any with the question marks. So here, if I go back to the issues, you'll see that there's this nice fancy table that I asked people to make, and I realized that that is kind of not ideal. So instead, I'm going to make my implementation pretty boring. We're not actually going to see it with this. I don't think we can see it with this approach, but on this branch, because we don't have any creation logic. But you'll see how terrible it looks in a second. So I'm just using console write line, right? Yeah, console write line. So I should get my enumerables. Let's get work items. So I fetch my work items here, but remember, notice that it's not actually doing the fetching here. It's just getting ready, basically. It's actually great here because we need to do some printing first. So in theory, the C# program should maybe think smartly about what to do, but that's an aside. So I'll make this really boring and kind of terrible looking. So it's ID, the title. I'll give it some spaces. Yeah, so this is like, we're gonna change this, but for the time being, it's gonna work fine. You remember also, like, this program is going to be a web app at some point, so the CLI doesn't matter too much. More importantly is that because we have a function that is getting the work items here, we can swap out how it's being displayed later. So for example, in this case, for the GH, right, the GitHub CLI, there's actually a flag you can give it called JSON, I believe. I think it's JSON. And then if I give it the fields like ID, title, and then labels, it gives me the same data but in a JSON format, which is very handy because then you can filter and stuff later. And maybe we want to do that for this program. And description, I'll give it a nice good amount of space. And work items, I think this is a thing. Be able to go to lists. Maybe this is where I do that. Binary search. Man, there's a lot of function it gives you. For each. There we go. How does a C# do lambda? Oh, it's very simply. So I'm doing something fancy here just for fun. Work item called TI. Basic that. Yeah. So this is we might call this like functional program, but basically I get my work items, I put it into a list, and then I say, okay, iterate through this list and do something with each thing. So it's basically a nice way to like do a for loop. We call it functional program because instead of having like a for loop, we call a function called for each, and then in that function we provide it another function. This is called a lambda, or it's basically a function without a name. And for fun, actually, I'll say, well, no, we won't do it, just because it's gonna be kind of messy. But what I'll do here is, and I'll do that fancy f string. So we can go here. We can do wi dots. Why is that work item? The work item does have a oh my gosh. So this should be class lms.model. So this should be models dot work item. lms.model work item. There might be something wrong with our DB. There we go. lms.models.work item. And that should make everyone happy. Yeah. So if I go back here, I can get the ID. I can get the title. I can get the created at. Can I get toString? Does it get a format? Oh, I just do year, month, day. So why I think it's what it wants. Why dash. The thing that always confuses me is month versus minute. So why dash capital M dash really like DD, yeah. And then I don't think dash is anything fancy. It's little yeah. So we want why dash mm dash DD. Okay, and then duets would be the same thing, but now for duets, toString, mm dash DD, oops, DD, and then description, oops. Daytime. No, look at that. I want to try that. Okay. I mean, that's a fancy way to call that function. And then the last thing is description. Do I not have a description field? Models, work item. Yeah, I'm not gonna worry about description for now. You can always add description later. Usually when you're talking about like database and like fields and stuff, you can always add to a database schema. It's harder to take away, so keep that in mind. And that's it for that, if I go back to my listing of the work items, it's going to look not as pretty as that, but it's going to be fine. I'm going to just add a little W here. And now I'll just add another one of these below. Again, it's not going to look great. But with that should be everything. Now it comes to testing. So we have a separate project for testing. This is something that C# does. And I'll create a new file called workitemtest.cs. And I'll look at my credits test. Namespace workitem tests. So public class workitem test. Apologies, I am pretty tired. Okay, so if I get my work item. Oh, you know what? Work item. Work item equals. And I need a new database. So let's look at the DB tests to see how they are doing it. So there's a new context that we're making. Memory. We're gonna. I think we can just say work item. Might want a new. Oh yeah, of course you know this. Okay. Some languages want the new, some languages don't. And you can see we need to provide the DB. Field initializer cannot reference the non-static field method or property. DB is not null here. There we go. Sometimes you just gotta make things static. And we're gonna add a test. So what will that test be? So I think very simple test is just something without without any items. So we can do public. Is it void? Yeah. Void test no work items. And so the function name you can give to your tests can be basically anything, just has to be informative. And when basically what happens is when we go to run the tests, oh my gosh. It just knows. So you can see here we are having some issues with we call this with namespacing, but nothing that we can't fix. And I am fixing it here rather than making an issue for it, because it's basically what's happening is because I created a new file called work item. That's preventing, there's a work item in here and then a work item in models. And because there's two files with the same name and then basically two classes with the same name, we have to rely on the namespace to deal with it. So that's why I'm fixing it here rather than making an issue. Future nodes, I probably will separate these more cleanly. Probably will create something called like controllers for the work items. But as an aside, yeah, so we just want to see what the an empty list looks like. So we haven't added anything to this work item. So we're gonna say work item, then get work items. GitHub. Oh, yeah. Work I would say, like, so when you're writing tests, we want to do that arrange act and then assert. So in our range, we're going to be basically saying what we want our expected values to be, and then sometimes we'll do some setup for the test itself. So in this case, the expected result is going to just be an empty list. So var uncalls expected will equal we're just going to create a new list of lms.models.work item, and it's going to be empty. And then in terms of the act, so this is where we get our stuff. So var actual equals work item dot get work items, and then we're just gonna convert it to a list. And then we're going to, I always forget how to do the certs in a language. We're just going to assert that they are equal, I think. Assert equal expected actual. Cool. So now that we have that, we can go and run .NET Test. There's some warnings that I should probably figure out for later. There's no work items. Collections differ. So I see the problem is we got a context. So maybe what the better approach is to provide string database names. So we can just give this a database name. Or maybe in the constructor itself. Oh wait, there's a DB path. There we go. Nice. Okay, so basically what we're doing instead is giving it the name of the database here. So in theory, we can just overwrite the constructor. So let's get rid of all this stuff. That's such a simpler solution than trying to figure it all by hand. Okay, so here we can just put a little comma, and we'll say the database name will be db tests. here, no, this is the same thing. Now there is we'll see if this actually oops, work cross test, because it's possible that the data will still bleed between tests within a single thing, but we can fix that, I think, a little more easily. Oh, I put that guy in the wrong spot. Okay, let's see if that works. Yay! So we fixed that issue, and we fixed it in a very, very simple way, which was just to update basically this line to use the DB path. So, which means never just blindly copy off Stack Overflow. Sometimes it's inevitable, but this is a lot cleaner of a solution to just update that. Cool. Now the problem I do foresee is what happens when you add one work item and then two work items. Range are expected. I'm just going to say this is 1, so we will just check the length this time. At work item oh, you know what? lms.models.work item. Let's say the ID I think starts at 1. Title equals test 1 work item. Blocks we won't worry about. Progresses we won't worry about. And due at will be at the time. New daytime. Do I have something in my DB tests about work item? Oh, we didn't even add work item, so not gonna worry about that. And so on here, we're just gonna add it. Expected, and say changes, cert. Now we're gonna get it. Oh, we should probably receive it here. So actual would be the work item. Get work items. So there's a few things. First, we'll assert that equal actual. I'll convert this to a list. Oh. Count, I think is what they call it. And another assert we'll say is that actual first see if that works. Nice. Okay. So something that could fail is if we are now testing two work items. Because basically this test could run and then this test could run, but just for fun too, I'll remove the ID because the ID gets set by the database. So if I remove the ID, I wonder what will happen. It might fail. Oh. Okay, well, I'll take it. So basically this test will run, then this test, but there could be some mess in between. So I'll just copy this guy. And I'll call this to work item 1. Oops, there's a double new. Got the second one. Act db.workitems.add. I'll just 2 and then now it does seem kind of pedantic to be doing these tests because if you think about it, we're just really testing this function. However, what we are saying is that we know this function to be correct, and we can just do like an eyeball test of this function and be somewhat sure. What we could do now that I think about it is to lift this into a string array, but I'll show that in a second. Equal expected to actual, that's the skip one, and then first let's see if this passes. It might fail. Yeah, okay. Values differ. Oh, you know why? Because I didn't save the changes. However, you'll notice in a second that I'm going to expect this to still fail, but instead of the actual being 1, it's going to be a 3. Yeah, there we go. It's a 3. So that is now where our iDisposable comes in. So what we want to do is just implement that interface such that the db.work items and we just remove the range of them. Now I believe the dispose should clear it up between oh, maybe I might have to run save changes. Oh, well, I'll just add this. But yeah, now we have a, well, I guess the changes get saved here. but yeah, so we use different names. So that's this. These names are like kind of how we know that we're not. You know, for example, it's not just this item that's getting called here and passing. Okay, so we are kind of spending a lot of time. I'm not going to worry too much about this code. So this code will remain untested. But what we can notice here is that it's getting the work item, so we know this to be correct, and console write line is very straightforward, and as also that's if you look here, this looks to be fine, and we notice we use this fancy for each loop, or we could even use like a range-based for loop. What we probably want to avoid is something like classic C, where it's like for I equals 1, blah, 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 because those kinds of loops, it's a little bit more error prone. But yeah, that's how I can rationalize this. So yeah, so as you notice, like sometimes when we're writing code, like there's going to be things that are untested. As you see, like sometimes it tends to be the user-facing code. It's just kind of like terrible because the user-facing code is kind of what is the most salient. However, you can still do a verification once we create the pull request. Speaking of, before I end up here to create the pull request, I do have to update the command line parser to tell it that we have some new valid nouns. So here, there should be something that says credits. We're going to add work item, singular, represents work item, and list remains the same, and the I think we added like this, work item, and then it's a new hash sets, and it also just receives a list. Oh, and I don't know if I put credits here. It should be work item. And my computer is very slow. So basically this says blah, blah, blah. And now down here, we can say that there's a new case for the work item. We initialize the work item. Give it the DB context. We cool. And just for the completeness sakes, we'll add some tests to the command liner parser itself. Test. And I'm actually going to lift this up. Oops, I don't want that. Lift this up to where it says credits. Test parse work item. And so that's just testing that our parsing is going to work with our new stuff. So you can run these. And we get a pass. And in terms of like a system level test, we don't have that much to go on for that. System level tests basically would involve creating the database, or maybe you could argue it's integration, but at a more broad level, we could create a test that sets up the database and then calls the program against that database. But I'll let that, maybe I'll do that tomorrow. Run, and then a work item list. And if I run this, it should just kind of give, oh, no such table, work items. Excellent. So this is a good problem to have. So we haven't actually created our database. And I feel like when you run into this problem, we just need to run the migrations. I think it's just called update. So we want to install the tools. Oops. And .NET if database update should be what we want. So yeah, if you ever run into an error, that's a good time to open up the Slack and be like, here's my error message, I'm really not sure. And then in this case, we know that, or we can learn that an error relating to like a missing table or something usually points to migrations not being run. So let's see if this thing can run without causing an issue. And from this, I'm going to create another issue here and be like integration / system level testing. Would be nice to have testing that covers app execution, especially for especially for the CLI stuff. When working on list work items, it is unfeasible to test manually because I don't have the DB set up. Cool. So we have something. It looks terrible, but it is fine. And then now I'm done. So I spent about an hour here, and then I can just write this completes 81. Okay. So I had committed my changes. There was a few things that I edited out related to like setting up Git. So on this repository specifically, the GitHub Actions bot will automatically create the pull request for you. So you don't really need to worry about that. You just need to push your changes. From there, you can see your test results and all that. And then on my side, I will end up adding my review. Sometimes I'll ask for changes, and then you can just keep committing to that if necessary, and then eventually it will merge. So yeah, so this took a little longer than I thought. I did see some issues in terms of how the testing works with like the database context and the bleeding over and all that, as well as some other issues with the name spacing. So I'll try to add to the docs related to that. But yeah, I'll create some other videos for the other issues related to work items. I'll do that on a separate branch without merging these changes, just to show how all that merging will happen in the end. Okay, thank you.